Claude Lemieux didn't just play playoff hockey, he became it. And now the sport says goodbye. The NHL Alumni Association announced Thursday that Lemieux has died at 60. No cause of death was immediately released. What remains instead is the remarkable outline of a career built for the biggest moments: 4 Stanley Cups, a Conn Smythe Trophy, and a reputation that grew larger every spring. For hockey fans, Lemieux was never an ordinary scorer. He was a player who seemed to understand that the postseason changes everything. When the ice got tighter, the pressure got heavier, and every shift felt like history, Claude Lemieux often became the reason the story changed. His journey began in Buckingham, Quebec, where a young Lemieux grew up far from the spotlight he would one day command. The Montreal Canadiens drafted him in the second round in 1983, betting on a player whose impact would not always show up in neat regular season totals. Over 1,215 NHL games, he recorded 379 goals, 407 assists, and 786 points. Those are strong numbers, but they still do not fully explain him. Lemieux's career was never just about accumulation. It was about timing, nerve, and a kind of competitive instinct that made him dangerous when the margin for error disappeared. His first great statement came in Montreal. Lemieux spent 7 seasons with the Canadiens, learning what it meant to carry the weight of an original 6 badge and a city that remembers every shift. In 1986, he helped deliver a Stanley Cup that still echoes through franchise history. One of the defining moments came in Game 7 against Hartford, when Lemieux scored the overtime winner to keep Montreal's run alive. It was the kind of goal that defines a reputation before a career is even fully formed. Long before the championships piled up, Claude Lemieux had already shown that he belonged in the highest pressure conversations. After Montreal, Lemieux's path took him to New Jersey, where he would become one of the most recognizable figures of the Devils' championship era. He played 6 seasons there across 2 different stints, and it was in New Jersey that his playoff identity became impossible to ignore. In 1995, he led all skaters with 13 playoff goals in 20 games and won the Conn Smythe Trophy as postseason MVP. That spring, the Devils captured the Stanley Cup, and Lemieux stood at the center of it all. He was not just producing, he was finishing. He was ending games, ending series, and ending opponents' hopes with a ruthless kind of efficiency. That 1995 run remains the signature chapter of his career because it captured the contradiction that defined him. In the regular season, he was a solid, productive forward. In the playoffs, he became something sharper. He finished his career with 158 postseason points in 234 games, of .68 points per game rate that tells the real story. He also scored 80 playoff goals, 9th most in NHL history. Numbers like that do not happen by accident. They belong to players who can raise their game when the rink feels smaller, louder, and meaner. Lemieux understood that environment better than most. He seemed to feed on it. Then came Colorado, and with it, another championship. Lemieux played 5 seasons for the Avalanche, adding a Stanley Cup in 1996, and further cementing a resume built on winning at the sport's highest level. Few players can say they helped power multiple title runs for multiple franchises. Claude Lemieux did it across 3 teams in different uniforms, under different systems, but with the same essential result. Whenever the games mattered most, he found his way into the center of the moment. That is why his name will always be tied to championship hockey, not just one peak, but a whole career of them. Of course, any honest remembrance of Claude Lemieux has to include the harder edges of his legacy. He was a fierce competitor, and at times a deeply polarizing one. Fans who loved him saw a player who embraced the chaos of playoff hockey and refused to back down. Fans who hated him saw the agitator who crossed lines and invited confrontation. That tension became part of his story, especially as his rivalry-filled years in Colorado added another layer to an already complicated reputation. But in an obituary, the full picture matters. Lemieux was not a one-dimensional villain or a simple hero. He was a force, and for better or worse, forces leave marks on the game. Even near the end of his career, he kept searching for one more chapter. Lemieux played late career stops with Phoenix, Dallas, and San Jose, extending a career that had already lasted far beyond the usual arc for a hard-nosed winger. Then, in an almost defiant final act, he returned to the NHL with the Sharks at age 43. That comeback said something about him that statistics alone never could. Claude Lemieux was unwilling to let the game drift away without a fight. He had already won everything that matters in team success, but he still wanted to test himself again. That hunger never really left. His final NHL totals tell the story of a long, demanding career. 1,215 games, 379 goals, 407 assists, 786 points. On paper, that is the record of a strong veteran. In memory, it is the record of a player whose value rose dramatically when the stakes rose with it. The regular season gave Claude Lemieux a platform. The playoffs gave him his legend, and that is why his place in hockey history is so distinctive. There have been more gifted scorers, more graceful skaters, and more polished playmakers. But very few players in the modern era were as reliably dangerous when the cup was on the line. After his playing days, Lemieux remained connected to the sport in another way, working as an NHLPA certified player agent and representing current players in contract negotiations. It was a different role, but one still tied to the same world of pressure, preparation, and competitive edge. Younger players did not know him only as a name from old rivalry tapes. They knew him as someone who had actually lived through the moments they dreamed about. 4 Stanley Cups, a Conn Smythe, a career built across iconic franchises. Few people in hockey could speak about what it takes to win with the authority Claude Lemieux carried, simply by having done it. And then there is the image that now lingers in a different way. Just days before his death, Lemieux appeared at Montreal's Bell Center, raising the ceremonial torch before a postseason game. For fans in the building, it was a brief moment of recognition. In hindsight, it feels like a final gesture from a man whose career always came alive in the brightest, tensest arenas. Hockey has a way of preserving its own symbols. Some players are remembered for elegance, some for speed. Claude Lemieux will be remembered for being at his most dangerous when every ounce of pressure belonged to him. That is why his legacy endures. Claude Lemieux was not simply a 4-time champion. He was a championship identity. He lived in the hard minutes, the tense shifts, the moments when one goal can change a franchise's memory. From Buckingham to Montreal, from New Jersey to Colorado, and through the late stops that kept his career alive, he left behind a story built on resolve. The sadness of his passing is real. So is the respect. In the end, Claude Lemieux belongs to a rare group of players whose careers are best understood by the games that mattered most. Share your Claude Lemieux memories in the comments.